of Mice and Men, page 24, chapter 2. Well, that was a lie, and I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself. He stopped suddenly, stepped to the open front door, and peered out. Say, what the hell are you doing listening? The old man came slowly into the room. He had his broom in his hand, and at his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, gray of muzzle and with pale, blind eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunting softly to himself and licking his grizzled, moth-eaten coat. The swamper watched him until he was settled. I wasn't listening. I was just standing in the shade a minute, scratching my dog. I just now finished swamping out the wash house. You was poking your big ears into our business, George said. I don't like nobody to get nosy. The old man looked uneasily from George to Lenny and then back. I just come there, he said. I didn't hear nothing you guys were saying. I ain't interested in nothing you was saying. A guy on a ranch don't never listen nor he don't ask no questions. Damn right he don't, said George, slightly mollified. Not if he wants to stay working long. But he was reassured by the swamper's defense. Come on in, sit down a minute, he said. That's a hell of an old dog. Yeah, I had him ever since he was a pup. God, he was a good sheepdog when he was younger. He stood his broom against the wall and he rubbed his white bristled cheek with his knuckles. How'd you like the boss? He asked. Pretty good. Seemed all right. He's a nice fella, Swamper agreed. You got to take him, right? At that moment, a young man came into the bunkhouse, a thin young man with a brown face, with brown eyes, and a head of tightly curled hair. He wore a work glove on his left hand, and like the boss, he wore high-heeled boots. Seen my old man? He asked. Swamper said, He was here just a minute ago, Curly. Went over to the cookhouse, I think. I'll try to catch him, said Curly. His eyes passed over the new men, and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows, and his hands closed into fists. He stiffened and went into a slight crouch. His glance was at once calculating and pugnacious, mean. Lenny squirmed under the look and shifted his feet nervously. Curly stepped gingerly close to him. You the new guys the old man was waiting for? We just come in, said George. Let the big guy talk. Lenny twisted with embarrassment. George said, Suppose you don't want to talk. Curly lashed his body round. By Christ, he's got to talk when he's spoke to. What the hell are you getting into it for? We traveled together, said George coldly. Oh, so it's that way. George was tense and motionless. Yeah, it's that way. Lenny was looking helplessly to George for instruction. And you won't let the big guy talk, is that it? He can talk if he wants to tell you anything. He nodded slightly to Lenny. We just come in, said Lenny softly. Curly stared levelly at him. Well, next time you answer when you're spoke to. He turned toward the door and walked out, and his elbows were still bent out a little. I told you about the high-heeled cowboy boots, right? How it's like, yeah, really dangerous to have your foot slip into the inside the stirrup. Very dangerous. So that's why you want those heels. George watched him walk out, then turned back to the swamper. Say, what the hell he's got on his shoulder? Lenny didn't do nothing to him. The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. That's the boss's son, he said quietly. Curly's pretty handy. He done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight, and he's handy, like as in a good fighter. So in the ring, he's a boxer, lightweight. Well, let him be handy, said George. He don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny? The swamper considered. Well, tell you what. Curly's like a lot of little guys. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys. Kind of like he's mad at him because he ain't big guy. You seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy? Sure, said George. I seen plenty tough little guys. But this Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but his Curly punk is going to get hurt if he messes around with Lenny. Well, Curly's pretty handy, the swamper said skeptically. Never did seem right to me. Suppose Curly jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curly is. And suppose he does the same thing and gets licked. Then everybody says the big guy ought to pick somebody his own size, and maybe they gang up on the big guy. Never did seem right to me. Seems like Curly ain't giving nobody a chance. Huh. That sounds about right. Little guy picks on and beats up a big guy. He's like, ooh, the little guy's a stud. Little guy gets beat up by a big guy. The big guy doesn't get... Big guy isn't a stud. The big guy should pick on someone your own size. George was watching the door. He said ominously, well, he better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter, but Lenny's strong and quick, and Lenny don't know no rules. He walked to the square table and sat down on one of the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled them. The old man sat down on another box. Don't tell Curly I said none of this. He'd slough me. He just don't give a damn. Won't ever get canned because his old man's the boss. George cut the cards and began turning them over, looking at each one, and throwing it down in a pile. He said, this guy Curly sounds like a son of a bitch to me. I don't like mean little guys. Seems to me like he's worse lately, said the swamper. He got married a couple weeks ago. Wife lives over in the boss's house. Seems like Curly is cockier than ever since he got married. George grunted. Maybe he's showing off for his wife. The swamper warmed to his gossip. You seen that glove on his left hand? Yeah, I seen it. Well, that glove's full of Vaseline. Vaseline? What the hell for? Well, I tell you what, Curly says he's keeping that hand soft for his wife. Gross. George studied the cards absorbedly. That's a dirty thing to tell around, he said. The old man was reassured. He had drawn a derogatory statement from George. So, a talking crap statement. That's a dirty thing to tell around, to spread rumors. He felt safe now, and he spoke more confidently. Wait till you see Curly's wife. George cut the cards again and put out a solitaire lay. Solitaire is a card game that you play with it's a solo game you can play with yourself. Slowly and deliberately. Purdy? He asked casually. Yeah, Purdy, but... George studies his cards. But what? Well, she got the eye. Yeah? Married 2 weeks and got the eye? Maybe that's why Curly's pants are full of ants. I seen her give Slim the eye. Slim's a jerkline skinner. Hell of a nice fella. Slim don't need to wear no high-heeled boots on green team. I seen her give Slim the eye. Curly never seen it. And I seen her give Carlson the eye. George pretended a lack of interest. Looks like we was gonna have fun. The swamper stood up from his box. Know what I think? George did not answer. Well, I think Curly's married a tart. So she's a flirt and a tart. Yes. He ain't the first, said George. There's plenty done that. The old man moved toward the door, and his ancient dog lifted his head and peered about and then got painfully to his feet to follow. I gotta be setting out the wash basins for the guys. The team will be in before long. You guys gonna buck barley? Yeah. You won't tell Curly nothing I said? Hell no. Well, you look her over, mister. You see if she ain't a tart. He stepped out the door into the brilliant sunshine. George laid down his cards thoughtfully, turned his piles of 3. He built 4 clubs and on his ace pile. The sun square was on the floor now, and the flies whipped through it like sparks. A sound of jingling harness and the croak of heavy laden axles sounded from outside. From the distance came a clear call, "Stable book! Woo! Stable book!" And then, "Where the hell's that goddamn inn?" George stared at his solitaire lay, and then he flounced the cards together and turned around to Lenny. Lenny was lying down on the bunk watching him. "Look, Lenny, this here ain't no setup. I'm scared. You're going to have trouble with that Curly guy. I seen that kind before. He was kind of feeling you out. He figures he got you scared, and he's going to take a sock at you the first chance he gets." Lenny's eyes were frightened. "I don't want no trouble," he said plaintively. "Don't let him sock me, George." George got up and went over to Lenny's bunk and sat down on it. "I hate that kind of bastard," he said. "I seen plenty of 'em. Like the old guy says, Curly don't take no chances. He always wins. He thought for a moment. If he tangles with you, Lenny, we're going to get the can. Don't make no mistake about that. He's the boss's son. Look, Lenny, you try to keep away from him, will you? Don't never speak to him. If he comes in here, you move clear to the other side of the room. Will you do that, Lenny? I don't want no trouble, Lenny mourned. I never done nothing to him. Well, that won't do you no good if Curly wants to plug himself up for a fighter. Just don't have nothing to do with him. Will you remember? Sure, George. I ain't gonna say a word. So a lot of you in your entry tasks say you ignore the bully and stay away from them. It's hard to do all the time, though. The sound of the approaching grain teams was louder. Thud of big hooves on hard ground, drag of brakes, and the jingle of traced chains. Men were calling back and forth from the teams. George, sitting on the bunk beside Lenny, frowned as he thought. Lenny asked timidly, "You ain't mad, George?" "I ain't mad at you. I'm mad at this here Curly bastard. I hoped we was going to get a little stake together, maybe $100. His tone grew decisive. "You keep away from Curly, Lenny." "Sure I will, George. I won't say a word. Don't let him pull you in, but if the son of a bitch socks you, let him have it." "Let him have what, George?" Never mind. I'll tell you when. I hate that kind of guy. Look, Lenny, if you get in any kind of trouble, you remember what I told you to do?" Lenny raised up on his elbow, his face contorted with thought. Then his eyes moved sadly to George's face. "If I get in any trouble, you ain't gonna let me tend the rabbits." "That's not what I meant. You remember where we slept last night? Down up by the river?" "Yeah, I remember. Oh, sure I remember. I go there and hide in the brush. Hide till I come for you. Don't let nobody see you. Hide in the brush by the river." Say that over. "Hide in the brush by the river. Down in the brush by the river. If you get in trouble, if I get in trouble, if you get in trouble, if I get in trouble." A brake squeaked outside. A call came. "Stable back! Stable back!" So, Down by the River, has anyone seen that SNL skit with Chris Farley? Guaranteed came from this part of this book. George said, "Say it over to yourself, Lenny, so you won't forget it." Both men glanced up, for the rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. A girl was standing there looking in. She had full, rouged lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. So, rouged lips, lipstick, on a ranch, really? Her fingernails were red. Her hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. She wore a cotton house dress and red mules, on the insteps of which were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. "I'm looking for Curly," she said. Her voice had a nasal, brittle quality. George looked away from her and then back. "He was in here a minute ago, but he went." "Oh," she put her hands behind her back and leaned against the door frame so that her body was thrown forward. "You're the new fellas that just come, ain't ya?" "Yeah." Lenny's eyes moved down over her body, and though she did not seem to be looking at Lenny, she bridled a little. She looked at her fingernails. "Sometimes Curly's in here," she explained. George said brusquely, "Well, he ain't now." "If he ain't, I guess I better look someplace else," she said playfully. Lenny watched her, fascinated. George said, "If I see him, I'll pass the word you was looking for him." She smiled archly and twitched her body. "Nobody can't blame a person for looking," she said. There were footsteps behind her going by. She turned her head. "Hi, Slim," she said. Slim's voice came through the door. "Hi, good looking." "I'm trying to find Curly, Slim." "Well, you ain't trying very hard. I seen him going in your house." She was suddenly apprehensive. "Bye, boys," she called into the bunkhouse, and she hurried away. George looked around at Lenny. "Jesus, what a tramp," he said. "So that's what Curly picks for a wife?" "She's purty," said Lenny defensively. "Yeah, and she's sure hiding it. Curly got his work ahead of him, but she'd clear out for $20. Lenny still stared at the doorway where she had been. "Gosh, she was purty." He smiled admiringly. George looked quickly down at him, and then he took him by an ear and shook him. "Listen to me, you crazy bastard," he said fiercely. "Don't you even take a look at that bitch. I don't care what she says and what she does. I seen 'em poisoned before, but I never see no piece of jail bait worse than her. You leave her be. Lenny tried to disengage his ear. I never done nothing, George. No, you never? But when she was standing in the doorway showing her legs, you weren't looking the other way neither. I never meant no harm, George. Honest, I never. Well, you keep away from her, 'cause she's a rat trap if I ever seen one. You let Curly take the rap. He let himself in for it. Glove full of Vaseline, George said disgustedly. And I bet he eating raw eggs and right into the patent medicine houses. I think that's eating raw eggs. Boxers and wrestlers often will drink a glass of like 6 raw eggs before a fight to gain weight and for energy, extended energy. And then writing patent medicine houses, he's like making fun of him with the Vaseline glove, I think. He cried out suddenly, I don't like this place, George. This ain't no good place. I want to get out of here. We got to keep it till we get a steak. We can't help it, Lenny. We'll get out just as soon as we can. I don't like it no better than you do. He went back to the table and set out a new solitaire hand. No, I don't like it, he said. For 2 bits, I'd shove out of here. 2 bits is a quarter. Your grandparents used to sing a song. 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits, $1. So anyway, 8 bits is $1. So 2 bits is a quarter. No, I don't like, if we can get just a few dollars in the poke, we'll shove off and go up the American River and pan gold. We can make maybe a couple dollars a day there, and we might hit a pocket. Lenny leaned eagerly toward him. Let's go, George. Let's get out of here. It's mean here. We gotta stay, George said shortly. Shut up now. The guys will be coming in. From the washroom nearby came the sound of running water and rattling basins. George studied the cards. Maybe we ought to wash up, he said, but we ain't done nothing to get dirty. A tall man stood in the doorway. He held a crushed Stetson hat under his arm while he combed his long, black, damp hair straight back. Like the others, he wore blue jeans and a short denim jacket. When he had finished combing his hair, he moved into the room, and he moved with a majesty only achieved by royalty and master craftsmen. He was a jerkline skinner, the prince of the ranch, capable of driving 10, 16, even 20 mules with a single line to its leaders. He was capable of killing a fly on the wheeler's butt with a bullwhip without touching the mule. There was a gravity in his manner and a quiet so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. His authority was so great that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. This was Slim, the jerkline skinner. His hatchet face was ageless. He might have been 35 or 50. His ear heard more than was said to him, and his slow speech had overtones not of thought, but of understanding beyond thought. His hands, large and lean, were as delicate in their action as those of their temple dancer. He smoothed out his crushed hat, creased it in the middle, and put it on. He looked kindly at the two in the bunkhouse. It's broader than a bitch outside, he said gently. Can't hardly see nothing in here. You the new guys? Just come, said George. Gonna buck barley? That's what the boss says. Slim sat down on a box across the table from George. He studied the solitaire hand that was upside down to him. Hope you get on my team, he said. His voice was very gentle. I got a pair of punks on my team that don't know a barley bag from a blue ball. You guys ever buck any barley? Hell yes, said George. I ain't nothing to scream about, but that big bastard there can put up more grain alone than most pears can. Lenny, who had been following the conversation back and forth with his eyes, smiled complacently at the compliment. Slim looked approvingly at George for having given the compliment. He leaned over the table and snapped the corner of a loose card. You guys travel around together? His tone was friendly. It invited confidence without demanding it. Sure, said George. We kind of look after each other. He indicated Lenny with his thumb. He ain't bright. He's a hell of a good worker, though. Hell of a nice fella, but he ain't bright. I've known him for a long time. Slim looked through George and beyond him. Ain't many guys travel around together, he mused. I don't know why. Maybe everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other. It's a lot nicer to go around with a guy you know, said George. A powerful, big-stomached man came into the bunkhouse. His head still dripped water from the scrubbing and dousing. Hi, Slim. he said, and then stopped and stared at George and Lenny. These guys just come, said Slim, by way of introduction. Glad to meet you, the big man said. My name's Carlson. I'm George Milton. This here's Lenny Small. Glad to meet you, Carlson said again. He ain't very small, chuckled softly at his joke. Ain't small at all, he repeated. Meant to ask you, Slim, how's your bitch? I seen she wasn't under your wagon this morning. She slang her pups last night, said Slim. 9 of them. I drowned 4 of them right off. She couldn't feed that many. Got 5 left, huh? Yeah, 5. I kept the biggest. What kind of dogs you think they're gonna be? I don't know, said Slim. Some kind of shepherds, I guess. That's the most kind I've seen around here when she was in heat, Carlson went on. Got 5 pups, huh? Gonna give all of them? I don't know. Have to keep them a while so they can drink Lulu's milk. Carlson said thoughtfully, well, looky here, Slim. I've been thinking that dog of Candy's is so goddamn old he can't hardly walk. Stinks like hell, too. Every time he comes into the bunkhouse, I can smell him for 2-3 days. Why don't you get Candy to shoot his old dog and give him, dang, just killing the pups and now gonna kill Candy's dog?
4 puppies and now he's like, yeah, you know, tell him to shoot his old dog. He probably has a pretty, good relationship with.
I can smell that. Shoot the old dog and give him one of the pups to raise up. I can smell that dog a mile away. Got no teeth, damn near blind, can't eat. Candy feeds him milk, can't chew nothing else. George had been staring intently at Slim. Suddenly, a triangle began to ring outside. Remember the dinner triangles? Ding, 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 ding. I'm going to bring one in if I remember. Barb, of course, Barb has one. He can't. Suddenly, a triangle began to ring slowly at first, and then faster and faster until the beat of it disappeared into one ringing sound. It stopped as suddenly as it had started. There she goes, said Carlson. Outside, there was a burst of voices as a group of men went by. Slim stood up slowly and with dignity. You guys better come on while there's still something to eat. Won't be nothing left in a couple minutes. Carlson stepped back to Slim to let Slim precede him, and then the 2 of them went out the door. Lenny was watching George excitedly. George rumpled the cards into a messy pile. Yeah, George said. I heard him, Lenny. I'll ask him. A brown and white one, Lenny cried excitedly. Come on, let's get dinner. So remember they're calling supper, and dinner is lunch. So this is lunch. I don't know whether you got a brown and white one. Lenny didn't move from his bunk. You ask him right away, George, so he won't kill no more of them. Sure, come on now. Get up on your feet. Lenny rolled off his bunk and stood up, and the 2 of them started for the door. Just as they reached it, Curly bounced in. You seen a girl around here? He demanded angrily. George said coldly, about half an hour ago, maybe. Well, what the hell was she doing? George stood still, watching the angry little man. He said insultingly, she said she was looking for you. Curly seemed really to see George for the first time. His eyes flashed over George, took in his height, measured his reach, looked at his trim middle. Well, which way'd she go? He demanded at last. I don't know, said George. I didn't watch her go. Curly scowled at him and turning, hurried out the door. George said, you know, Lenny, I'm scared I'm going to tangle that bastard myself. I hate his guts. Jesus Christ. Come on. There won't be a damn thing left to eat. They went out the door, the sunshine laying a thin line under the window. From a distance, there could be heard a rattle of dishes. After a moment, the ancient dog walked lamely in through the open door. He gazed about the mild, half-blind eyes. He sniffed and then lay down and put his head between his paws. Curly popped into the doorway again and stood looking into the room. The dog raised his head, but when Curly jerked out, the grizzled head sank to the floor again.